Hi, and welcome to a very special episode of Page One, the Writers' Podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Derek.
And thanks for joining us on the podcast, where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing journeys, find out how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And we've got a great back catalogue of guests, from authors to screenwriters to video game writers to comic writers. So please do check that out if you haven't already. But this week, we've got a very exciting guest.
Yeah, this week we're chatting with Nicholas Binge, who is a fairly new writer on the scene, and he's ascended the mountain, you might say, recently, and he's made quite the impact with his latest book, Ascension. You see what I did?
That was very clever.
Yeah. And his entry on the scene is quite like dream story, I think, a lot of us hear about, wasn't it? Where he put his book out there to try and find an agent, and he got not one, but 7 offers, which is just wonderful. You know,
yeah, amazing.
Fantastic.
So he tells us all about, that whole process of getting these offers, and then when the book actually then goes out to editors, you get publishing houses that weren't even sent the book asking for the book. It literally is the dream story if you're an author. So it was really fascinating to speak to Nick about that, also about his writing process and the structure of his books, which are slightly different from your sort of average sci-fi thriller. Yeah. So it's a really great chat. We'll get straight to it. So, well, as you know, my first question in every podcast is, did you always want to be a writer?
That's a good question. I've always written to some degree, I think, definitely. I mean, even when I was at school and young, I was writing, terrible short stories and even worse poetry. God, don't ever ask me about poetry. And then I'd do forays into different things. When I was like in kind of sixth form equivalent, I suppose, I wrote this like 2-act play that we then put on in the school and stuff. So I was always doing bits and pieces like that. Yep. And then that kind of fell off when I went to university because I was busy. Not studying, just doing other things, being at university and being a student, right? And then I left that, I went into teaching, I moved to Hong Kong, and I think when I got to Hong Kong, I met a lot of other, so I was working out there as a teacher, and I met a lot of other really talented, really creative people, and really ambitious people, and a lot of them had big dreams. I met this other guy, Andrew, who he wanted to be a screenwriter, and he was like writing scripts and stuff like that, and that kind of pushed me into being like, I should do something, right? Yeah. I should do something with this. I've always loved creating. I've always loved writing. I've always loved writing stories. I'm going to write a novel. And at that point, I didn't really have ambitions of like, I'm going to be a published author or anything like that. I was just, I wanted to be able to say that I'd written a novel. And so I sat down and I planned one out, and I planned it meticulously, something I no longer do. And I wrote just this really derivative fantasy novel, basically. Like it was, but I'd done it, right?
Finishing a novel.
I was proud about it.
Finishing a novel is a big thing. It's a big moment to see. You can do it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and it took me about a year to get it all down on paper and edit it, and so I did that. I wrote this novel. I was really happy with it at the time. I look back at it now and I feel kind of shame and cringe at it, but at the time I was really proud of it, and so when I finished it, I was like, I'm going to get this published. I'm going to get this published, and I knew nothing about the publishing industry whatsoever. I didn't know that you needed an agent. I'm not sure I even knew that agents existed. I just knew that I liked to go into shops and buy books, and I wanted to get things published. So I did a little bit of Googling, big publishers, what I saw, I think at the time, I don't know if they still do it. At the time, this was almost 10 years ago. Now, only 8 years ago. Tor do have an open submissions, right? So you can send stuff into their /pile without an agent. And I was like, oh, amazing. So I bundled up my first 3 chapters. Now, my first 3 chapters, you'll laugh at this because my first 3 chapters were from 3 different POVs because it was a ridiculous epic fantasy novel. And my query letter was basically me sending those 3 chapters, which weren't great, to Tor. And at the same time, a little explanation that was like, Now I realise that this might not be a great start to the story. I think I said that, like in my query, you know.
Strong. I like that. Okay, confident.
But I promise you, it gets better. Right? And didn't really write a query letter.
Did you hear back?
Not yet.
You never know, man. You never know.
I haven't had a rejection yet. But honestly, I sent that off, and it was literally, naive as I was at the time, was like, here it comes. Here's the book deal. Yeah. Like it's on its way. Heard nothing back, obviously. And then started to do a bit more research about the industry, started to look up a bit more online, find about agents, all of that kind of stuff. Started querying that book. It went nowhere. I spent about a year querying it, got about 100 rejections, realized that it wasn't the right book, started writing another book, wrote another book that was better, also fantasy, also kind of second world fantasy, but a bit more interesting, a bit less derivative, playing around, which I do much more now when I write, but playing around a little bit more with structure and playing around with kind of narrative and positioning and stuff like that. Was happy with that, queried that. That died as well on query. Nobody wanted that.
Was this for an agent? Did you try?
This was for an agent that I was now querying for, because I learned a little bit more about the industry. So I queried widely for that. That died as well. And I kind of hit a moment after that where I was like, well, what is it? What's not working? You know, where is it that I'm hitting? And I don't know if it was a conversation with a friend or I think it was, where we were talking about kind of writing process and things like that. And I said, you know, why am I writing fantasy? Because I don't really read very much fantasy at the moment. I did when I was a kid. Yeah. I read, like, when I was, 13, 14, 15, I, devoured, the long, 10-book series of pretty much anything, and I would absolutely read tons of it. And that I think that's where I first went to because of that. When I started writing, I was like, I know this space.
Yeah,
like, I've
comfort genre, you'd read loads of it.
Exactly. Yeah. I've read hundreds of books in this space. I can write about it. But I was like, but actually I read the occasional fantasy novel now and again, or at the time I did. But now, what do I read? And at the time, I read a lot more literary fiction. I read a lot more kind of more experimental fiction. I read some genre stuff, but when I did read genre stuff, it would tended to be more kind of speculative and grounded with a kind of literary bent to some degree. And I was like, maybe I should write something like that then. That's clearly something that I'm passionate about and I'm interested in at the time. So I ended up writing Professor Everywhere, which is far more, it's sci-fi, it's got kind of multiple dimensions and it's got like other things going on, but it's also far more experimental. Like it's written as a academic memoir from the perspective of a woman, like 10 years after a big event. It's got like footnotes, it's got like all sorts of weird stuff going on. Like it's got a lot of me playing around with form, right? And I had a lot of fun with it. I really enjoyed it. And the querying route, I don't know, it hadn't really worked out for me for the past couple of books. So I was like, are there other routes that I could go? I was in Hong Kong at the time. There's this kind of quite small Southeast Asian literary prize that was being run by a publisher in Hong Kong. I was like, try submitting it to that, see what happens. And they liked it. They came back to me. They were like, we're shortlisting it for the prize, and B, so it was a prize for unpublished works, obviously. Yeah. And B, we want to publish it. And I was like, oh wow, that's amazing. That's really cool. Yeah. So I was like, yeah. Absolutely. And again, this was another naivety moment from me, and another reason why it's always recommended you have an agent. I didn't have an agent. I was like, oh my God, my book's going to get published. Yeah. And they were like, here's the contract. And I basically just didn't even look at it. I was like, yep, sign my name on that. Yeah, do whatever you want. Yeah. Like, I was just so excited about getting published, genuinely. I think I glanced over it, but I was like, I'm not going to not sign this, you know? And so I signed away basically all rights that I had to pretty much anything to do with the book, you know, which any agent would have told me was a stupid thing to do. But, world rights, translation rights, subsidiary rights, film rights, everything like that. They have everything pretty much in perpetuity with no reversion clauses or anything that, right? Wow. It was pretty ironclad, right? It was pages long.
And obviously, it kind of made you think, is that almost the purpose of some competitions like that, where it's unpublished authors and the contract is so clear? Yeah, it does try to scoop up works. People I don't know. Naive people don't really understand.
I don't know if it's deliberate maliciousness. I'm not sure if I would call it that, but I do think that there's a that they're aware that they're working with people that don't have agents,
exactly.
and that they can kind of
Totally.
they can wangle a few more rights away from you than they would otherwise get. You know, and I think that and that's it. I think their heart's in the right place, and they're trying to publish good books.
Okay.
You know, ultimately, but definitely, I don't think I would have signed that if I had a bit more knowledge about it. But anyway, it went through. It got published. It was very, very small. They were a very small indie press. But I had a physical book in my hand that I could like wave around and be like, "Look, I got published." And I did like a tiny little launch event from my place where I like signed 15 books for friends and was very proud of myself. And that was great. And meanwhile, I was always writing. So I was writing the next book. I actually started writing Ascension while that was going on. And then that's when we moved back to the UK, and that's when I moved to Edinburgh. And I moved to Edinburgh. I moved to Edinburgh, and I basically just finished Ascension, and I had a kind of timeline because I was like, okay, I want to get an agent for this. I'm back to the UK. I want to kind of follow this a little bit more. So I queried. Yeah. I was like, I'm going to query Ascension. I'm going to try and get an agent. I'm going to try and get a UK agent. Previously, I just queried widely. I'd queried mostly US agents because those are the big, famous, popular ones, you know, and things like that. Mostly, I mean, I'd had a few full requests, but not that. I had actually one really awkward and I think really bad. I'm not gonna name and shame the agent here, but one really bad experience with my second fantasy novel, where an agent requested the full, read the full, or had almost finished reading the full, and then sent me an email saying I want to get on the call, and I was like, this is it, this is the call.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? And then I was like, oh, when can we schedule a time? We scheduled a time, and then that time that they were sick, they were like, can we reschedule? And then that happened like repeatedly for like 3 or 4 weeks, and then they just completely ghosted me and disappeared. And I was like,
that's bizarre. Yeah.
What happened there? Like it was very weird.
Yeah, why not just see? Yeah.
And so it's so difficult to find an agent to get to that position.
Yeah.
And then suddenly have it pulled away from you must have been horrible.
It was really disheartening, and it was part of the reason that I moved away from kind of like, I'm just going to query all US agents and things like that, and part of the reason why I kind of looked for some different routes. So anyway, I moved to the UK, and I was like, what am I going to do? I'm going to sign up to one of these writing conferences where you can pitch to agents one-on-one and maybe use that as a little bit more of a personal touch. So I did, and I had that. I moved to the UK basically 1st of July 2020. And the conference was like the 3rd of July 2020.
Okay, right.
But it was all online because we were in the middle of COVID then, right? So that was fine. It had all gone online. But I had these set up. So I was like, I'm going to get my book finished for then so that I can pitch it.
Yeah.
And then that month, July 2020, was ridiculous. So basically I had 5, this is funny, because I had 5 one-on-ones with agents and editors.
Yeah.
One was with an editor, who I'm not going to name now. One was with an editor first, an acquiring editor at a relatively well-known kind of genre imprint in the UK, and then 4 was with agents, UK agents. And I had to send them the first chapter, I think it was, and then a query, and we just... The idea was they would give me critique and feedback on the chapter and query, but I went in being like, this is a pitch. Like, this is what this is, even though it wasn't called that. Like
Yeah, but you know that that's always a possibility with these things. When
exactly.
If you're faced with an agent or someone, who knows where it might lead.
They're not going to ignore something
that
they think is good.
Exactly. If they read it
if
and
only
they
this
love
was
it,
a pitch.
they're not going to be like,
exactly.
I'm bound by the rules. It doesn't say pitch, exactly. So I went in with, not ridiculously high hopes because I'd already had 2 books die on query and all of that kind of stuff. Yep. So I went in, and the editor was first, and the editor kind of tore my first chapter to shreds, if I'm honest. Really? Yeah, she was like, what she actually said to me quite specifically, which I think is fascinating. She said to me, this is a boys' book, because it was from the perspective of a man with like mostly men climbing a mountain type thing. Like there were female characters and stuff, but she was like, I can see this is a boys' like book. And she said, people don't publish those nowadays. Is what she said said to me. She was like, this you're gonna have to change your tack on it. This isn't gonna get published, right?
It's very sweeping.
Yeah,
generalization.
But to hear that from a relatively high up editor, I was like, oh, okay, that's another book in the trash. Start on another one, take another tack. Great. And then I went into the next meeting being like, well, let's get this over with, let's hear why it's terrible and it's never going to get published. And it was the first of the 4 agents, and they loved it. They were like, loved the first chapter, loved the query. The query was amazing, and I was like, could I maybe send it to you? And they were like, I was going to ask anyway. Like, please do. Here's my email. Send me the full. And then all the rest of the agents said exactly the same thing.
Wow, fantastic.
And they all asked for the full. So I was like, okay, this is great.
I mean, that is a prime example of that kind of saying of if one person says one thing to you, take it a pinch of salt.
Yeah, absolutely.
If 5 people say that's fair enough, but here you go, you've obviously had one person just was not right for that book.
Exactly. And I think that's a big thing to learn for any aspiring writer. Like, even if someone is in a position of kind of relative power in the writing industry, even if they're they're an important editor or they're an important agent, their opinion is still just their opinion, and absolutely. A sweeping statement does not apply to the entire industry.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something that I've learned. So I had these 4 fulls in the bag, and I was like, literally just shaking. I was like, I have no idea how to respond to this. I don't know what to do. I'm a member of like a little critique group, a little writing group, and I was messaging them, and they were like, just query more people. Like, that's the first thing. They were like, just get it out there. Like before somebody comes back with an offer, get some queries out there. So I quickly Googled like top SFF agents in the UK, like found a list, and I queried 4 more people, just like that day. And I was like, if it goes on a bit longer, I might query a few more, but I just queried the top 4, right?
And did you tell them that it's with other agents have asked for a full to give
I didn't
time
straight
pressure?
away. I just sent. I was like, if I get a request back, then I'll mention. But I sent it. So I sent it out. I think I sent it out on the Monday, I think, if I seem to remember, to these 4 other agents, just query in their inbox, like cold query them. And then the next day, literally, I think it must have been less than 48 hours after sending the full, one of the agents that I met at the writing conference emailed me and was like, I'm going to offer on this. I'm going to call you.
Okay.
Right? Literally within 48 hours of sending the full. He
Pressure.
said, I stayed up all night. I couldn't put it down. I've woken up this morning, like, I'm going to offer. So I was like, great, let's have that call. And I immediately emailed the other 4 that, like, all the other agents that either had the query or the full, and was like, I've just had an offer. Do you want to read more, or do you want to... And one agent ghosted me, never replied, right? Which, standard, right?
Yeah.
And the other 3 all asked for the full as well.
Yep.
And by 3 weeks later, because I gave them all a 3-week deadline, partly because my current agent was just about to go on honeymoon, and he was like, I really want to read this, but I'm about to go on my honeymoon.
Okay.
Please, can you give me a little bit more time? Can you give me up until I come back from my honeymoon in time to read it? So I was like, I'm going to give everyone 3 weeks. And by the end of the 3 weeks, I had 7 offers.
Wow. That's amazing.
Everyone offered.
That's fantastic. That's
I
know.
Yeah, and I was just, each time one came in, I was just like, what do I do? Like, what?
So, how do you...
Yeah. Yeah, how do you decide? I don't know. I had calls with all of them. I had a couple of calls with some of them. So I had a call with all of them. I had a big spreadsheet. I was talking to other friends in the industry, like pros, cons, all of these sorts of things. What was really interesting is I had a spreadsheet, and I'd go on a call with them. I'd ask questions, and my questions would get increasingly bold as they went on. Yeah. You know what I mean? So like at the beginning, when you first have your first agent call, like you just don't want to screw it up. You've been waiting for this for years, right? And you're just like, so what do you like about the book? Like, just you're almost kind of tiptoeing around it. And I think by my final call, which I had with Alex, who's my current agent, I was basically like, this other guy says he can do this. Can you beat that? Like, I was at that point. I was like playing hardball with them because I had so much on the table, right? So yeah, I kind of put them in spreadsheets, was talking about them, looking at their agencies as well, which I think is really important if you have those kind of offers on the table. Like it's not just who they are as an agent, it's where their agency's at, what they can offer, all of these sorts of things. And so I whittled it down a little bit. I knocked a couple of agents off who I was slightly less interested in. One, because there was one agent who wanted to make really quite substantial changes to the book that I wasn't on board with, like really quite substantial changes. So I was like, look, I like you as an agent, but that's not going to work. There was one who was, bless him, he's done really well over the past few years, but at the time he was just a very junior agent starting out at a relatively small agency, and like I was like, there's bigger fish on the table. And so as I started to kind of whittle them down, I think I had 2 or 3 that I was between, and I'm still waiting for Alex to come back to me, who was on his honeymoon. And I was like, I can't decide. I had 2 calls with one agent, and I was like, I'll call you back. I want to talk about this and positioning and editors you'd submit to and blah, blah, blah. And then Alex came back, and he said he wanted to offer, and we went on the call. And it was a very much like when you know situation, and this has happened to me a couple of times. Like, I was debating so much, and by the time I put the phone down with Alex, I was just like, it's him.
And was that kind of like a gut feeling almost?
Yeah, it was. I mean, there's obviously loads of impressive things. He's a fantastic agent. He represents some wonderful people. He also works for C&W, who are a very large agency and have all sorts of wonderful connections in the industry. And because they're a subsidiary of Curtis Brown, who are a subsidiary now of UTA, so they have all the like film connections and foreign rights connections and all that kind of stuff. But he also just got the book, and like the way he was talking about it and what he was going to do with it, it was very much a gut feeling. And I got to the end and I was like, I'm going to go with you. Like, that's perfect. So we did, and we signed it, and then that was it. I had an agent for Ascension, but it was all like, crazy.
So, I mean, I want to explore that a bit more with you, and then we need to talk about Ascension for those that don't know what it's about. But your query letter, because we've spoken about this before, but your query letter broke the rules in some way because, for example, I think one of your comps was Dracula, which is a very old book, and you're always told should be the last 5 years or whatever. So, I mean, what was your pitch for Ascension?
My pitch was, I obviously can't remember the name of my hand. I could find it if I looked it up, but the pitch was quite a specific kind of just breakdown of the plot, right? But my comps were Dracula and Annihilation, and I think quite specifically it was. I think if you're going to do they always say past 5 years, blah blah blah, all of that kind of stuff. I think it's one of those classic things where the rules are there, but if you've got a good book, you can break them. Yes. Like, if you've got a good story, it doesn't really matter. And no agent's going to be like, this sounds like a really good story. Oh,
yeah. If only it wasn't like Dracula.
If only his comp was in the last 5 years, I can't read it. Like.
And also, I also think that in that situation, there are certain touchstones that everyone knows, and it's very easy to position your story, even if it is an old story. If it's a classic, as long as you're not saying it is a rehash of this, but if you're saying
there's an element to it.
With Dracula, I think for you it was and I'm going to say this wrong, epistolary aspects of the book that you were comparing there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Ascension was always a kind of, it started out as a love letter to Gothic fiction, and it's got those Gothic horror elements. It's got that kind of that epistolary, that kind of letter narrative, and that framing device at the beginning. So it's got a lot of those elements in like Dracula, Frankenstein, things like that, deliberately so. It's not anything like those stories in terms of the actual plot, but I felt like that needed to be in there because it's a touchstone. It's a deliberate homage to that style, right? And so I think in my query I did say something like, the epistolary narrative of Dracula, rather than just say like it's Dracula, right? So that worked, and that seemed to go down quite well with them.
Yeah, and obviously you got the agent with all these offers. You found Alex, and then after that, I don't think it was a very long time before you were suddenly being given a good publishing deal either.
It was around, it was July, August that I signed with Alex. We edited it. We did a couple of editing passes. Alex is quite editorial, and I like that. I think good editors are so valuable, and I'm definitely not someone who's precious about my work. Like, I really value someone being able to be like, this works, this doesn't, you should move this around. So we did a couple of editing passes, and by the time it was ready for sub, it was about February, I think, of the following year. so 7-8 months, something like that. February, March, something around then. We went on sub, and yeah, in what happened? We went on sub. It got sent out. I was very nervous, as everybody is on sub. You keep hearing all these stories of books dying on sub and all of those sorts of things. So like, literally 2 days later, I was like, nobody wants it. Nobody wants it. It's all falling apart, right? But about 2 weeks later, we got our first offer from Titan. Which was good, which Alex then used to kind of hustle other people. And then what was the next offer? I think it was Rebellion offered next, a little bit higher than Titan. Then Wildfire, who are an imperative headline, offered. Then Bloomsbury called in. We didn't even officially submit to Bloomsbury. It's really interesting how the sub process worked. So not all the editors that offered were people that Alex initially submitted to. And this is something that I found really interesting when a hype train starts going with a book. There are so many people in the industry that have their ears to the ground, and there are people that I later discovered whose jobs it is to have their ear to the ground, film scouts, book scouts, all of these sorts of things.
What's doing the rounds and what's getting the buzz.
Exactly, to pick up on these things and then go to other people, right? So we suddenly had editors from imprints and publishers that we'd never subbed to calling Alex and being like, I hear you've got this book, can you send it to me?
Oh.
So that Bloomsbury did that, and they called in and we sent it to them. They offered as well. And then Harper Voyager came in with an offer as well. So we had 5. And so it was going to an auction, which very exciting. At the same time, C&W's wonderful foreign rights team basically started building on. They were like, the hype buzz is happening at the moment. This is quite rare to take place kind of as the actual sub is going on. But they were like, the hype buzz is building. We're getting call-ins from people, all of these sorts of things.
Yeah.
We're going to start shopping foreign rights at the same time. So even before my UK auction was over, I got a preempt from Finland.
Oh.
Like just out of nowhere. I didn't even know it was on sub to Finland. Like the next day it was just like, this guy from Finland has just sent you in a preempt. And I was like, yeah, great. So actually the first deal that was signed for Ascension was Finnish. It was before the UK deal was actually signed because we were still in auction then. And then like, yeah, over while the auction was happening, like there was a Spanish deal, there was a Czech deal, there was a Hungarian deal. I mean, I've sold to 8 other territories now outside of US and UK for translation. I went to auction in France between two publishers in France who were fighting over it. So that was all happening. And then, so I'm like in another world at this point, basically. Like this is beyond my wildest dreams. I'm going to auction in the UK. We hadn't, so Alex had kept the rights, the US rights, so it was just UK and Commonwealth. And the plan was to basically, which worked astoundingly well, the plan was to sub in the UK first, build buzz, so that when we went to the US, people were already talking about it.
Yeah.
So we hadn't submitted to the US yet. But then I remember it so specifically. I was in bed. It was like 10 p.m. I was getting ready to like go to bed and go to sleep. And I get a text from Alex that just says, how old is Harold again? He's the protagonist of Ascension, right? I was like, I don't know, like 45, 46, something like that. I couldn't remember exactly. But I was like, around 45-ish. Why? And he texts back saying, some studios are interested as what kind of age of actor would play him. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then the next day, he puts me in contact with the C&W's or Curtis Brown's dedicated book to film agent. Yep. So he's the guy who's got kind of his hands in all the film industry stuff. And he basically says, yeah, you've got some film offers coming in. Like, because somehow, then this is all the people, so there's these film scouts out there who basically keep their ear to the ground. And the moment that buzz starts being built in the same way as this, that an auction's happening and rights are being sold and all stuff like that, they will nab onto it and rush off to the film studios and be like, I've got the hot new thing, and that's their whole job. There's a whole industry worth of kind of connected people. So they did that, and then yeah, we got a TV offer, we got a film offer. That was competitive as well. That also went to a kind of auction type environment.
Brilliant.
So that all happened at the same time, and then so I ended up with quite a large film deal, which when the offer was actually sent through, I literally responded by just walking up and down my flat screaming. I had no other response to it. I was like, I'm still not allowed to go into the details of it in terms of the production company and the people who are attached and things like that. But let's just say it's you would have heard of the Hollywood films that they make, and I did, and I was just like, this is ridiculous.
I mean, when you were writing Ascension, obviously every author, when they're writing their latest thing, they want, the reason you're writing it is you want it to be better than your last story. You want it to be good. But did you have the feeling that this was something that was going to generate all this sort of buzz? Did you have the feeling that this story was something special that you were writing, or did it just feel like a natural progression?
It felt like another book.
Yeah.
It felt like the next book that I was writing, And I think there's two things that helped. I think once the kind of a hype train starts moving, it kind of gained its own speed, gained its own momentum to some degree. And I think it's not just about the quality of the book at that point. It's about people looking and going, "Oh, they offered on that, and I want to get in." You know what I mean? But I think there's a couple of things that differentiated it in terms of the early interest that the book got. And one of them that I've been thinking a lot about recently is what I'm going to call marketability, in terms of the immediate, obvious pitch for it. So when when people send stuff to either agents, or when agents send stuff to editors, and you get that reply that like, "I loved it, but I don't have a vision for it." Right? I don't have a vision for this particular book. What they mean, as I've discovered, is not that they don't have an editorial vision for the book. It's that they don't have a full vision. Like, when an agent or an editor sees something that they want to offer and they fall in love with, it's usually because like they can see the cover straight away. They can see the log line. They can see what's going to be written under the cover. They can see all the marketing touch points. They're going to put it in a bookshop. And reading my book, I mean, the concept at the beginning, big mountain, middle of ocean, that's easy to put on a cover. It's that some books are wonderful, but like, what do you put on a cover? And that makes a difference, and it makes a difference with the marketing teams, because ultimately they have a big say in the acquisitions meetings of whether or not you're going to buy a book, and agents know this and editors know this, and I realized that when Harper Voyager, during the auction, who I went with eventually in the UK, they sent me this marketing deck as part of the thing, which is basically like a collection of PowerPoint slides of all the different things that they're going to do to market the book. And immediately, they already had this, like 2 days after the cover, with the "if you ever read this, tell others, don't come here." They already had that sketched up.
Wow, okay.
Like they already had that idea in their head. Basically, the book was giving them so many marketing ideas that they were like, this is something we can work with. And I think that marketability, rather than the prose or the characters or the ideas or things like that, is something that stood out.
Exactly. I imagine it's a mesh of it all, but certainly the marketability side of it is important, which, when we've had other people on the podcast, we've always asked, write the story you want to tell, but, if you want to be a commercial author, I always personally think that you have to have some eye, not right for the market, but have some eye on the market, in the sense of, will anyone actually ever want to publish this? Maybe not. Maybe you're still happy writing the story. That's absolutely fine. But if you want to sell it, then you need to think about that a little bit as well.
Absolutely. I think you do. And I think anyone, I think in any type of art, somebody who's just completely in the like, I'm only making art for myself and I don't think about the people who are going to read it and things like, fine, but that's, it's not going to end up being successful, or a 1 in a million might. You know what I mean?
And it's not a bad thing to be either one. Like, there's a lot of people who can look on the nose at people who write commercial fiction, and it's like, well, there's nothing wrong with saying, well, I will compromise on my artistic vision because the ending that's been someone else has said to me is actually a better ending for sales or whatever, and that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. And so it's a balance between putting your work out there and making a living off it, and they can work hand in hand, and there's not a right or wrong way of.
Yeah, totally. I even think that it's a false dichotomy. I don't think that there's a separation necessarily between my artistic vision and then what the reader wants or what the editor wants and things like that. If something works better for the reader, well, why am I writing? I'm writing for it to be read, right?
Yes.
So if something works better for the reader, then my artistic vision really is that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
I don't have an artistic vision that exists outside of the reader experience. Like, I'm writing for readers.
Yeah.
So in that sense, that's good. And I think I was thinking about that. The second thing I was thinking about when I was writing Ascension was the kind of the pace of it and the aspect of it. It's more like a thriller than previous books that I've written in that way. And I was very much thinking about that. Like, I wanted the book to feel like you couldn't put it down, right?
Yeah.
That there were always twists and turns, and the next exciting thing was happening. And so often I'd kind of write myself into a corner, because I would get into the end of the chapter and I would be like, the pace is starting to feel a little bit plodding. I'm going to have somebody shoot somebody else in the head. I don't know why. Or I'm going to have like some crazy thing happen. I'm going to have a monster appear out of the darkness and kill somebody, right? And then I'll have to be like, okay, now what do I do with this? Like, I wasn't planning on that. I'm going to have to rethink the next few chapters of my story. But I was always constantly, I think that's partly why I've moved from, I said I wrote my very first book. I planned it meticulously, and I did. I planned it scene by scene by scene before I started writing it. I was like clear, 3-act structure, all of that kind of stuff. I look back at it now, and it's plodding, and it's a little bit soulless. And now, I've written a few books since Ascension, and kind of a novella and various things that I've kind of got in my back pocket. But now, when I get an idea, I just start writing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm such a discovery writer now. I have no idea where I'm going with it. I start with a premise, and I'm like,
We've chatted before about that kind of planning, pantsing stuff, and I think the thing that we've always said, and obviously there's no right or wrong way of doing it, but for me anyway, the more I plan, the more I take away from myself. Like, it's I kind of lose that fun of discovering things as I go, and it takes the joy of it almost. It becomes a bit boring to write, and it becomes boring to read as a result of that almost.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Some of the most fun I have is drafting, especially when I don't know where the story's going, or even if I have a kind of an outline of where I think the next few chapters are going to go.
Yeah.
Just completely allowing myself to deviate from that if it feels right. If it feels like, a character that I had an outline for the next 3 chapters, it feels like that they need to die now, then I'm going to kill them, like in the moment of drafting. I'm not going to be tied to my own plan, because...
Yeah, and if it surprises you, then it should surprise the reader as well. If it comes out of left field.
Yeah, but at the same time, to sort of put up the fight for planners a little bit, but like you've even said there, that there must come points in the discovery writing where you pause and go, right, where am I going with this? You don't sit down at the start and plan the whole thing out, but to tell a coherent story, presumably there comes points where you're having to sort of take a moment and think, right, where is this going now?
No, that's absolutely true. And what I'll usually do is I'll draft a few chapters, or I'll even draft a chapter, and then I'll like go for a long walk. Mm-hmm. And then in that time, the coherence of the next 3 or 4 chapters will come into my head, and I'll be like, okay, I'll do that. I think it's not that I don't plan those chapters at all and that it's completely discovery. It's more that, and there are touch points even when I'm writing a book, I have a sense of kind of a few touch points of things that I want to happen later on in the book. Like, I kind of want an ending to look a bit like this sometimes, or sometimes. The last book I wrote, I had no idea how it was going to end when I was writing it. I wrote that I got 80% through drafting it, and I was still like, I don't know how this is going to end. But yeah, it's the freedom to deviate from the plan and not holding yourself and tying yourself to it it's kind of you're restricting yourself, because I think that's a bit silly.
What do your first drafts end up like then? Are they needing a lot of work in the revision stage, or are they fairly clean at that?
I revise a lot as I go, and I think this is quite a rare thing from other authors that I've spoken to, but I can't imagine any other way to do it. A lot of people are like, get the whole vomit draft down and never go back to it, that type of thing. I write a chapter, I edit that chapter, and I work with other writers and beta readers, and I've got a little critique group, and we critique that chapter and we talk about it, and I do that for every chapter before I move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm. Wow, so before you even start writing the next chapter, you go through that whole process.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And I think in my head, the reason I do that is because I'm discovery writing and because I'm not entirely sure exactly where the character arcs are going and things like that. I feel like every single chapter it's the foundation upon which the rest of the book is built, right? It's the beginnings. If I'm going to understand where a character arc is going to go, I need to know who they are and what their conflicts are and what their internal, situation is as effectively as I possibly can at the beginning of the book. Otherwise, what am I writing, right? And so if that foundation's not strong, I'm built. Like if I have to go back and then change chapter 1, I then feel like I have to change the whole book.
Okay.
And I don't have time for that.
But I was going to ask about your critique group, which I know that you're in, and it's a fairly small group of people that you do that with. And my understanding is that it's fairly intensive in terms of you all reading each other's work and critiquing. But do they all work in the same way? Because if they're submitting, do they submit chapter by chapter like that as well?
They've come to the light. No, not initially. So we did at the beginning, and then so this other guy joined our critique group. Dave Goodman, he's an excellent writer. Stories in Clark's World, you should look it up. And he was very much like, I don't work like that. I don't want you guys holding me back. I'm going to zoom off with my thing. And yeah, after a couple of months, he was like, this whole like critiquing every chapter thing really works, guys. And I was like, yeah, it does. Like, see, it really, really works. And so it's kind of fine. I think people find a happy medium between the two a little bit, but we all try and critique the whole book as we're writing it and work through it.
It gives you a sense. That's a lot of commitment though to each other, and I suppose gives you an accountability as well in terms of your own writing to make sure you've got the.
It really helps to keep me like writing a lot. So when I'm drafting, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to write a chapter every week because we meet every week, and we and if we're all writing, I mean, we could have to read and critique 20,000 words a week, easy.
Yeah.
So it's intensive. It's a lot of work. So we're all very, very committed to it, but it's good. I'm so lucky that I found a group of people that are that committed to it and as talented as they are. I think they've made such a difference to my process, for sure.
Yeah. Well, okay, Ascension, we've talked around it and about it and over the top of it for the last half hour or so. Why don't you tell us what Ascension is actually about?
Okay, quick pitch. I need to practice this for when I'm going to like conferences and stuff like that, right?
This is the peak.
This is yeah.
We can let it go after that. Yeah.
All downhill after here. This is the height of my career.
Never mind these book auctions and stuff. You've made it onto the
This is the real magic, right?
Exactly.
So a giant mountain appears out of nowhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Huge, bigger than Everest. Nobody has any idea where it's come from. Satellite imagery shows that a couple of months ago it just wasn't there, and then it is. And so a team of scientists led by this guy called Harold Tunmore, a physicist, with a somewhat kind of murky and difficult past that we discover as we go through the book, are hired to investigate the mountain, basically, to get there and see what's going on. As they get there, they discover that they're actually the second team that have been hired to climb the mountain. The first team are all dead. In kind of circumstances, everyone's being kind of shady. They've been hired by this sort of quasi-military outfit that they're not entirely sure who they are or what they want. But the kind of the intrigue of the mountain is pulling them in, and what they've learned from the previous team is that the higher they go up, the kind of the weirder the anomalies get. So they realize that they need to climb the mountain in order to work out perhaps what is going on. Oh, sorry, the team are not all dead. The one surviving person from the team is, of course, Harold's ex-wife, who is there. She's survived. They managed to get her and bring her back down to base camp, and she's basically gone completely insane. And so as they climb the mountain again, they take her with them because she's the only person that's been up into that and kind of has maybe a sense of what might be going on. But a lot of it is about him coming to terms with what happened in the past in their relationship, and a lot of stuff that he's buried. And as they go up the mountain, basically weird stuff happens. I don't want to give too much away. Time dilates, hours kind of feel like days, days feel like weeks. We're not entirely sure how much time is passing. Sections of the mountain seem to move entirely on their own, as if it's kind of a living, breathing thing. And particularly in a kind of, and this is the kind of the love letter to Gothic fiction, in a very kind of Gothic horror, Edgar Allan Poe madness way, the team all start to get very paranoid and kind of turn on each other, and that kind of thing. It's kind of like The Thing, but on a mountain rather than in the Arctic, to some degree. And yeah, that's the book basically. And then they climb, everything goes wrong. Some things go right, and then we eventually discover why the mountain is there in the first place.
And we both read it. It's a great book, but the opening of it is really compelling and brilliant, and I can see why that would excite people, the agents and editors that read it, because it really draws you in, and it is told, as you say, in this it's a series of letters through the story, which sort of draws you into it more, because it's a mystery. I think setting it in that structure makes it more like a mystery that you want to try and solve yourself as the reader. But and it did make me. You've had touchstones to things like you said, Dracula. Annihilation is an obvious one for me as well. It reminded me quite a lot of Arrival as well in aspects of it, and as well as the speculative elements. There is you've sort of hinted at it in your summary there, but there's an emotional thread through the novel to do with family that I think is one of the things that elevates this above your sort of standard speculative novel. And I just wondered, is that something that was always it was obviously always in it when you were writing it, but was it always something that you had in your head that you wanted to explore?
Definitely, yeah. That was always in there, and I think in anything I write, there's this kind of, I need to find the emotional core of the story to some degree. Yes, I'm writing a thriller that's all exciting and fun things happen and people die, but like, what's the emotional core of the story that I'm telling, and why am I telling it? And I think it comes back to this kind of this touchstone of horror, right? I was like, I'm writing a horror book, and for me, horror, I'm fascinated by horror that doesn't lean into the kind of like boogeyman under the bed horror, but leans more into the kind of the genuine things that horrify us as actual human beings in day-to-day life, right? And so I wrote it actually shortly after my son was born, so shortly after becoming a dad myself, and I kind of had a moment. I was like, what is literally the most horrifying thing that I could possibly think of? Like, what scares me the most? Surely if I'm writing horror, I should be writing about what scares me the most, right? And so in that sense, that kind of emotional story needed to be in there. My next book that I wrote after that also has those horror elements, and in the same way, one of the kind of touchstones behind that is Alzheimer's and dementia, and because that's another thing that terrifies me, like a real life horror. The idea of losing your mind and your memories and losing your identity and who you are, right? And so I think those very real horrors that actually scare us in real life, kind of inserting them into the story, makes it quite compelling.
Yeah.
So for you, is that the kind of starting point when it comes to your ideas? Was for something like Ascension, say, what came first? Was it the climb up the mountain, or was it the parent-child relationship? What came first, and did you build the other one around it?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I genuinely don't know. I think the mountain came first. I think the idea of the mountain came first, but the character and the emotional arc of the character came quite quickly afterwards. And I think from quite early on, I was playing with ideas as well, like larger ideas of kind of ego and humility as well, which I wanted to explore. And kind of I was interested in setting up characters that would explore that. I mean, in the novel, you've got Harold, who's kind of far more humble in many ways, and you've got him set against the Beton, the mountaineer character, who's basically the personification of ego, right? And arrogance, and kind of those touchstones, and exploring how actually there was a little bit of that in Harold's past himself, and all of that kind of thing was something that was early on a very big part of what I wanted to do in the book. But I think with this book, I think the mountain came first, like as a concept. It appeared in my mind.
And you said earlier that obviously when Alex picked it up, you worked on it with him for a few months, and then obviously once it's got picked up by the publisher, I'm sure you've done work with the editor as well. I mean, in terms of that work, what were you working on? Did things structurally change, or was it just sort of tightening things up, making things flow better?
It was tightening things up and just expanding on certain things. Nothing about the whole text structure changed from the first draft that I submitted to Alex. Nothing fundamental. Alex did some things to tighten up the pace a little bit. There was some bits where some of the like scientific explanations for some of the things that were going on, kind of, he was like, this is dragging a bit too long. We don't need to know all of this. You know what I mean? It's fiction, not non-fiction. Like, stop it. And like cutting back on that. There was a note, I think, that I always remember at one point in one of the editing passes that Alex did, where he was like, you need to kill a few more people. Not because I wasn't killing the people that I had on the mountain, but because just to keep the pace up. So it's like, you need to add some red shirts in. You need to put some you need to give some soldiers that can die at certain points to kind of give it a little bit more pace. So I can do that. I can throw in some characters that I then kill off. And then with my editors, because of course I have two editors. I have my UK editor and my US editor. So it's sold to Riverhead in the US, who are a wonderful imprint of Penguin, and Voyager in the UK. And my two editors there, they both worked together on the edit letter, have just been amazing at so not kind of changing anything structurally, but just really getting to the heart of some of the things I was trying to do with the characters and the themes, and really picking those out and being like, okay, I can see that you've tried to put this in here, but give me a little bit more. Like, you need to just expand a little bit more at this point. Or making links between things that I'd kind of almost subconsciously made but not consciously made, and then being like, oh, you do this here at the beginning of the book and you're doing something here at the end, and there's actually, if you could make the link between them a little bit more explicit. And I was like, oh yeah, sure. So like, just honing and refining, but in a way that I don't think I would ever have been able to catch myself.
You need that extra pair of eyes.
Definitely. It's like a step removed as well, isn't it? It's not as close to all. And I mean, you've got a US and a UK editor like that. You know, how does that work in having two separate people in different markets? Because ultimately, do you have the same book in both places, or is each version of the book different for? So the book is functionally exactly the same. They Americanize the text for the US, which means they go and take U's out of words and things like that. To kind of make it so that the Americans don't panic when they see color with a U written in it. So that's been Americanized for the US, but otherwise the text is exactly the same. In every way. And how the editing worked is basically, I don't know the full details of it, because what happened is the editors presumably got on a call with each other and had a detailed chat while they were doing the edited letter, and then kind of presented an edit letter to me together that they'd worked on together. And obviously I think there must have been some chats about market sensibilities, because I think even when you look at the covers, the two covers, and I was chatting to you about this just before the podcast, Marco,
these are the arcs, but
these are the arcs. There's a similarity.
Similar though, but just if you haven't seen that, this is the American one here, and this was the UK, which is similar, except it now says Ascension down there. Yeah,
but it's still got the kind of mountain in the middle. But so Voyager are a much more obviously genre imprint, right? They do SFF, some horror, a bit of speculative stuff, but that's very much the way they lean. They're very commercial, they're very genre, and they're very good at what they do. Riverhead do some genre stuff, but not very much. They don't really do very much SFF at all. I might be their only like proper sci-fi book, to be honest. They publish people like Khaled Hosseini, and people like Marlon James, and like quite literary, in their approach. But they're quite broad. I mean, Paula Hawkins, like The Girl on the Train, so they do some some commercial stuff and some, but not really much genre stuff, But they took a punt on me. They were interested. They wanted it. The editor there really fell for it. Really liked it. But you can tell that they're pushing it to a slightly different market.
Yeah.
And you can tell that just by looking at the covers, you know.
The US one looks much more like a kind of classic sci-fi vibe to it, whereas the UK one is much more like a kind of horror-y vibe in my mind.
Yeah, exactly. And the UK one, I can tell even from the marketing, they're going much more down the like, this is a sci-fi thriller route, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas the US one, because it has all these elements, and I think that's part of what helped sell it, the US one is much more like, this is kind of a literary sci-fi, you know, this is like a deep, big thinking sci-fi type book. And I think what helped sell it, you know, if we go back to that conversation before, is this kind of both? It kind of crosses those boundaries a little bit.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, they've kind of, so it must have been an interesting conversation for the two editors to have to kind of, which I wasn't a part of, to meet in the middle there, I think, and work out which sensibilities they wanted to take.
And obviously, as we record this, the launch is next month, which you must be getting very excited for, and nervous, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, right? It's a weird thing because, I mean, the book deal was 2 years ago, essentially, right? It takes that long, especially with a lot of these big imprints, so they have to fit you into their schedule, and they want to build time to do edits and to push marketing and stuff like that, right? So it's been 2 years since I did the book deal, which feels like ages ago. But yeah, it's exciting building up to it. Definitely, I'm nervous. I'm nervous to see how the book will do. I mean, it's been doing well. People are saying really nice things about it. It was one of Goodreads' most anticipated books of 2023 and things like that. So it's like it's showing up on lists and things like that, which is exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like, it's unlikely that it's going to completely flop. You know what I mean? Like, and I think people have talked about this on your podcast before, but you do have a sense going into something being published of how it's going to do based on some kind of early marketing stuff, right? Yeah. You know, like, for example, the Broken Binding are doing a special edition, right? They're doing a fancy, you know, sprayed edges, all of that. It looks gorgeous. It's absolutely amazing, right? But they're doing 1,000 of those, and particularly with crates and things like that, that like they bought into that. That's not returnable. So I immediately know that I've sold 1,000 copies. You know, like, which is. Some books never sell 1,000 copies.
No,
like,
and actually selling 1,000 copies in terms of bestseller lists is a big punt up there, isn't it?
Possibly, yeah. We'll see. But yeah, those sorts of things make a difference for sure. So yeah, I'm very excited. It's good. It comes out in the UK on the 27th of April. If it sounds interesting, please. I know people say this all the time, but please do pre-order. It makes a difference. Like, it genuinely makes a difference. Don't be like, oh, wait till it comes out and pick it up in a bookshop. Like, just spend the money now. Like, or I think even if you, there are some places like Amazon, if you pre-order it, you don't actually spend the money until it gets
until they ship it.
Until they ship it. So don't even just say you're going to spend the money later. That's fine. Like, but it makes a big difference to an author because it's such a. Those early pre-sales and week one sales and things like that impact so much of the way your publisher views you for future books and things like that, and all of those sorts of things. So please, if you're thinking of doing it, go ahead and pre-order. And if you're interested in coming to the book launch, it's happening at Blackwell's on the 27th of April in Edinburgh, and it's open to the public. So, you know, more than welcome to come along to that as well. Please do.
And you can get a signed copy there as well.
And you can get a signed copy there as well. Yeah.
Now you mentioned just there or earlier on that you've written more stuff since Ascension. So what's next? You know, what's have you got lined up? Was it Take the Book deal? Was it multiple book deals? So
it wasn't a multiple book deal. No, it was a standalone. Okay. Just for one book. And there are upsides and downsides to both, you know, getting multi-book deals and single book deals and stuff like that. But this was just a single book deal. But both of my publishers have indicated that they're interested in what I'm going to write next. Obviously, they're invested in me as an author. So I just need to. I've been working with my agent and working out exactly when is the most opportune time to pitch to them. It's a complicated one, and I'm not going to go into the full details of it with Ascension, but I think it's an interesting one for writers to think about if you are in a kind of standalone book deal. Is do you pitch to the publisher before your book comes out and try and get some of that headwind and stuff like that, and they're like, oh, this looks like it's going well, or do you wait till after? Because waiting till after is a gamble in both directions. Because if it doesn't do as well as you'd hoped,
Yeah.
then suddenly your next book deal isn't going to be as good.
Yeah.
But then let's say it does really well,
Yeah.
then suddenly you should have waited till after. You know what I mean? If it hits, for example, a Sunday Times bestseller list or something like that, suddenly they're going to be like, oh, we'll give you a bigger advance.
Yeah.
So you do wait for that. So those are conversations we've been having. But I've written it. I wrote it ages ago. I'm quite prolific. I write like a book a year, basically. So in the last 2 years, I've written 2 more books on top of Ascension. And I love it. Every beta reader, apart from my mum, every other reader, and I'm talking like probably 25 at this point, who has read it, has said that it's better than Ascension and it's the best book I've ever written thus far.
Brilliant. What did your mum say?
My mum was like, oh, couldn't really get into it.
Come on, Mum.
Mum.
But now
She really loved Ascension though.
your
She
mum
was like, Ascension is fantastic.
But your mum is just the first publisher who was like, nah, it's a boys' book. It's
Yeah,
not gonna
yeah,
sell,
exactly,
so it's
exactly.
fine. You only need that one voice. You can just ignore
Yeah,
it.
all the others say it's great, and I'm really proud of it. I'm really happy with it. It's how can I describe it? It's the time traveler's wife meets Inception,
Nice.
meets at a third touchstone, and I can't remember what it is now. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Oh, okay. Right.
Those are my 3 touchstones.
I can see the kind of Alzheimer's vibe.
There's a whole thing about memory and time and kind of time travel. There's a lot of experimental stuff going on with structure. There's kind of there's ostensibly 2 narratives happening at the same time that kind of slowly bleed into each other as the book goes on. But there was one point where I'm writing a chapter. I remember it clearly. It was chapter 7. And I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? Because there's literally about 4 different time periods happening simultaneously. There's like a conversation that's happening in the present about an event that happened 3 days before, in which one of the characters has time traveled back 20 years earlier, and then there's something else going on, but they're all within the same sentence taking place. And it was a challenge to write, but like it was fun. I'm really happy with it, and it's that, but like it's got the same thriller vibes as Ascension. It's got the same kind of like,
that sounds fantastic.
keep it pacey, keep it like crazy things happening, twists, turns, never predict what's going to come next. That's the whole
And
thing of it.
does its title end in ION?
It does, yes. Its tentative title is Dissolution
Nice.
at the moment, which actually I wasn't my first go-to. I didn't have a title for it originally, but yeah, my agent, and I believe my agent said this after speaking to my editor, was like, stick with the ION titles. They're like that's gonna be your like thing. That's gonna be your okay, fine.
And yeah, well, when you are able to share news about films and stuff, we'd love to hear that, and we can mention that on the podcast. But those were the main questions that we had for you. But as you know, as a regular listener of the podcast,
I am. I'm a deep lover of the podcast.
We always ask our guests the same question at the end of the podcast. The first of which is, what was the last book that you read?
The last full book I read. I'm reading something else now, but the last book I finished was Richard Swann's The Tyranny of Faith.
Oh, nice.
Have either of you guys read it?
I've not read it yet.
No,
No, I read the first one, but
Justice of Kings, I loved last year, and you know how I said before, like I don't read too much fantasy at the moment, often because like a lot of fantasy books I'll pick up and I'll be like, this is like, I don't know. I've read a lot of fantasy and it feels a little bit derivative. Yeah. I picked one up recently. I'm not going to say what it is because I'm not going to badmouth other authors on your podcast, but that was getting very lauded and lots of people, and I didn't make it past 15% because I was just like, I've had enough of like, I don't know, like young boys in taverns, you know, like chatting about like dragons, and like I was a bit, it didn't sell it for me. Justice of Kings I thought was great. I really enjoyed it. I loved the kind of restraint that he showed actually in a lot of the kind of magic systems and things like that, and it was just really compelling. The Tyranny of Faith was everything I loved about Justice of Kings, like on overdrive. Like I think it was double as good a book as Justice of Kings, and I love Justice of Kings.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it. I would strongly recommend it to anybody who read Justice of Kings, or even if you haven't, read both. Really good book.
Yeah. No,
Nice.
the first one was great, so I'm looking forward to that.
What about the last film that you watched?
Does it? Okay, last full film. Does it count if I watched a film and then had to stop it halfway through because it was so bad?
That's even better.
Exactly. I want to hear that film.
That's even better. This is it last night? No, Sunday night. Yeah, last night. Last night we attempted to watch Black Adam.
Oh, right,
Oh
okay.
yeah, okay.
Wow.
Yeah. I've not watched. I've not tried to watch that
Don't.
yet. Yeah,
No,
I've
I don't
heard
know
so
why
many
we
bad
even.
things
I was
about
like, I was like, we wanted to watch a film, and there were lots of films that I wanted to watch, but my brain was kind of fried after what was a hectic weekend. And I was like, I want to put something kind of stupid on,
switch off your
something
brain,
switch
just-
off my brain, yeah. But I didn't want to switch off my brain that much, like it was painful. I don't understand how films with that big a budget can be that badly written, like just
I
like
know.
Yeah, I know.
blatant plot holes, like dialogue that feels like it's been written by a 4-year-old. Like I don't get it. I don't understand how that
I
happens.
mean, I think with that one as well, part of the problem was that The Rock was so heavily invested in telling
And becoming the
his
feature
version of the
DC,
story. Yeah.
yeah.
So I think
yeah.
there were probably 20 writers on the film or something. So, yeah, no.
Awful.
I
yeah.
mean, I'm a big DC fan, but yeah, not on my list to watch.
We turned it off halfway through. The last full film I watched was The Menu, which I loved.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
the menu's great.
The Menu was great. The menu is if anyone wants to feel a taste of like the kind of vibes that I'm into, both in writing and in media, The Menu was right up
Yeah.
my street. I
That was
love
like
that kind of creeping
Really moments
horror.
of like just not knowing what was going to happen next and
Yeah.
some real shocks. Yeah, I thought the menu was fantastic.
Yeah, really loved it.
And what about the last TV show that you watched or are watching?
We have started watching. It's a bit late. This is probably about a year or two old now, but we finally got around to it. Watching Yellow Jackets.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. I loved that.
I'm enjoying it a lot. We're like 4 or 5 episodes in. I like it. It's just really compelling, really interesting.
It's very kind of smartly written. Just that you keep wanting to find out what's happened. The flashbacks and forward. It's very smart way to just make you think. Well, I had to find out what happened.
Yeah.
I had to find out what happens next. Yeah.
Just excellent pacing for a mystery. Excellent, like, good. A touch too gory for my wife. She has to like look away for a lot of the scenes.
Yeah, it's
and
kind
I'm
of
like,
Lost meets in a very kind of gory version of Lost.
Yeah,
Lost,
very
isn't
gory
it?
Lost. Yeah, Lost if they all were cannibals and ate each other. That's definitely.
All right, well, that's the main questions, but the very, very last thing we do, super quick fire, either or. So I will say there's no right answer here apart from one of them. And but we'll start off with Annihilation or Arrival.
As film or book?
Film. Yeah.
No, I would say book.
Say book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, do both.
Oh,
do both.
do
Do
both.
both.
Yeah.
I think that Annihilation is a better book and Arrival is a better film.
I probably agree with that.
I think that's it.
I have to say the Arrival book, it just didn't click with me at all. Everyone always says it's fantastic. But
It didn't click with me in the same way that
I
the
don't know
film
if I'd
did.
seen
No,
the
the
film
film-
first, maybe ruined it. Or
I think that was it. I
Yeah.
saw the film first and then I read it,
Yeah.
and because you knew what was coming.
Yeah, I
it
wonder if
didn't-
yeah.
Yeah,
perhaps.
I'm the same. I mean, Arrival's I think
Oh,
it's one of the
phenomenal,
best films.
Oh, absolutely amazing.
TV or cinema?
Cinema when I get a chance.
Night Owl or Early Bird?
Early Bird, which would have shocked like 20-something-year-old me to say, but like.
Is that just because you've got kids?
Yeah, that's because I have kids. I don't have a choice. But like,
exactly.
but it's also completely changed my mindset, I think, and now I'm useless past 5 o'clock. Like I just can't do anything. And if I write, I have to get up and like write in the morning.
Okay.
I mean, I was going to ask, sorry, I'm now jumping back into main questions, but I was going to quickly ask, obviously we mentioned the critique group and how much you're doing there. You work full time, you've got 2 young kids. When do you write? Do you have a set time of the day, or
No.
do you squeeze it in?
I squeeze it in whenever I possibly can. I've gotten very good at like writing immediately. When people ask me how I find the time, I'm like, yeah, but when you sit down to write, you like go make yourself a cup of tea, and like you waste like 20 minutes.
You've
That's
got
such
to
valuable 20 minutes. Yeah, that's like 3 minutes you've wasted. Like those are 3 valuable minutes. Now, because time is so precious, I'm like, okay, I have 12 minutes to write. I'm writing from like 10 seconds in. Like I sit down and I write for that 12 minutes, and then I see what I have, and that's the only way I kind of fiddle in little fits and starts and segments throughout my life.
Nice.
Cool. Music or no music when you're writing?
It doesn't really make a difference. Sometimes I have music, but I just quite quickly drone it out. And then if I have no music, I just drone everything else out as well. And I just kind of get in a zone with it. So increasingly no music. So if I'm out and I don't know, in a cafe or something, I'll put on some music just to so I don't hear other people. But certainly nothing with lyrics though. I think that's the standard answer.
Yeah. And the last one, and some would say the most important one, real book or ebook?
I don't want to disappoint you, Tarek.
So don't do it. So don't. If you don't want to do it, then don't do it. No one put a gun to your head.
If you'd asked me the other formulation of the question, which you sometimes ask, you would have had a good answer.
We'll edit this.
Edit. Yeah. I love ebooks. I do. I really love ebooks, but I love real books. I love real books more. But I love them both a lot more than I love audiobooks. I can't listen to audiobooks very much. I don't like them.
Okay.
But it depends on context. I probably read more ebooks than I read real books.
Because of the kind of
just
comfort,
the ease and the comfort, and also because
so many smart reasons to.
Yeah, so many smart reasons to, and because
it sounds like I've won. Listen to the
Amazon have made it very, very easy to just go, buy, book, and then just start reading. They've made it too easy,
isn't it? Yeah.
But if I had the choice, if someone was like, here's a new book you're excited about, I could hand you the real book right now, or you could have it on your Kindle, I'd be like, well, I'm going to take the real book.
Fair enough.
Cool. Well, thanks very much.
Thank you for having me, guys. It's been
that was great fun.
That was great.
Awesome.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UKPage1, as evidenced here. And our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.